This is an AQA Psychology A-level revision video for the paper 2 topic of Biopsychology, with this specific focus on lateralisation of the brain and split brain patients research. So, lateralisation is referring to the idea that our two halves in our brain, left and right, are functionally different. The left hemisphere is dominant in language and the right hemisphere is dominant in facial recognition, for example. Split brain research was the research that was carried out in order to investigate lateralisation. It was conducted on the 60s on epileptic patients because they had gone through surgery to control their seizures, where they had their corpus callosum severed surgically and safely to stop the two halves of the brain communicating, and therefore allowed Roger Sperry to study what each half of the brain is responsible for. So, split brain research consists of epileptic patients, therefore it's a quasi-experiment because the IV is a predetermined characteristic within the person. A better background is obviously seizures of epilepsy are caused by the firing of brain cells excessively, and so the procedure would sever the corpus callosum to reduce the violent effect of those seizures, allowing Roger Sperry to take opportunity and advantage of studying the hemispheric disconnection, what each half of the brain does. So you need to understand that language is localised as well as lateralised. So it's localised to Broca and Wernicke's area, but it's lateralised to the left hemisphere. But Broca and Wernicke, in the majority of the population, is in the left hemisphere. Other information you need to know about the brain is that the right side of the brain controls the left hand, the left side of the brain controls the right hand, not just hands but sides of the body as well, and it receives information from the opposite visual field. So I recommend you do this in a flowchart where the right side gets information from the left of the body, the left side gets information from the right of the body. Left hemisphere controls the right hand, gets information from the right visual field, and is responsible for language. So these are the main things you will need to know about each hemisphere. Right hemisphere controls left hand, information from left visual field, responsible for facial recognition. So just pause the video and make a note of that if you feel like you need to. Checking your understanding. So let's use that flowchart to understand some of the different tasks Sperry gave his participants. If you're happy with a grade C, then you just really need to learn the main task, which is describing what you see. But I'm going to go through 4 different tasks that Sperry gave the participants so he could be confident about the jobs of each hemisphere. Describing what you see. A picture shown to the right visual field would go to their left hemisphere, which is responsible for language, so they would be able to describe and identify that image. If they were shown something to the left visual field going to the right hemisphere, there's no language centres there, there's no communication between hemispheres because their corpus callosum is not intact, they would not be able to describe it. Composite words are 2 words that are presented at the same time, and in this case, 1 to each visual field. So, for example, the word key was going to the left visual field, and the word ring to the right visual field. That would mean key is going to the right hemisphere. So that is dominant in creative tasks. They would be able to draw a key to show they understand that word, but not say it. They would also draw it with their left hand because it's gone to their left visual field. Ring, much more straightforward, right visual field, left hemisphere, language centres, the word ring. Once they've drawn the word key and they can see that in front of them without it being manipulated to either visual field, they see the word key, they've said the word ring, and they put it together, key, ring. Facial recognition, right hemisphere is dominant in facial recognition. So if they had to match a face from other faces, from the left visual field, right hemisphere, they're able to do that. But if it was presented to the left hemisphere, to the right visual field, they were not able to recognise it as a face. And recognition by touch. If information went to the left visual field and the right hemisphere, there's no language, so they couldn't say what the object was in front of them. However, they could show they've understood it, because the right hemisphere, remember, it's creative, so they would select a matching item, something to represent what they'd been shown, but with their left hand, because it's their right hemisphere. So that is Sperry's research. Go back in the video if you need to, think about the procedure, think about the sample, and identify some strengths and weaknesses, and in 5 seconds I'll go through the answers. Okay, so we've got a fair amount of strengths. It was very controlled, very scientific, highly standardized, helps us understand the functions of each hemisphere of the brain, and it does that in a very strong way. The tasks and the multiple different tasks that they used is like clear validity, showing this is what the right hemisphere is dominant in, this is what the left is. It was very pioneering because Sperry himself won a Nobel Prize. Very significant research into hemispheric lateralisation. The fact that he produced a quasi experiment, he took an opportunity with these specific participants is very important for psychology, for someone to recognise that. However, there's a massive lack of ecological validity because in real life they wouldn't have their visual fields manipulated so that they can only see it to one visual field. Split brain patients live a normal life because they're able to move and adjust their visual field so that information can go the correct way. In that experiment, they had like cardboard to separate their visual fields. It was manipulated in a highly controlled way, so it just doesn't resemble real life. So a very small sample of 11 patients who have had surgery, so it's inappropriate to make generalizations about non-epileptic patients using these patients. Okay. You also need to evaluate the idea of hemispheric lateralisation in general. So there are some questions on the board. 5 seconds, I'll go through the answers. Okay, so Sperry's split brain research supports lateralisation, and you just sort of talk about the findings and how that helps us to understand each part of the brain and what it's responsible for. It was highly controlled. They were presented with visual information one at a time. They stared at a fixation point. What they could see and couldn't see was highly manipulated. The amount of time the image was projected was standardized. But there were only 11. There were epileptic patients. It was rare surgery. And actually some of the patients had more disconnection than others. Some still had a little bit of corpus callosum. So you can use that to evaluate the research into lateralisation, but also the actual sort of biological argument of lateralisation can be argued in these ways. One in green of domestic chickens showing lateralisation is very advantageous because it allows us to multitask. But Turk et al. Shows a patient of JW who had damaged the left hemisphere but could talk from the right hemisphere because of plasticity in the brain. And obviously you have to know plasticity and functional recovery is a whole section in biopsychology, so that knowledge will be relevant here. And it demonstrates actually it's far too simplistic to suggest that everybody's language centres are in the left hemisphere and they will always remain there. We know that the brain does respond to trauma. It responds to experience. It's adaptable, it's mouldable, it's plastic. So this research and the concept of lateralisation is far too simplistic. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.